You've said the words, "I forgive them," and your gut still doesn't believe you. You said it because it was the right thing to say. But honestly, you're still waiting for it to feel true. At least that's how it was for me. Way back in the day, I briefly ran a small business with my buddy Ray. I did operations, he handled the books. Turned out he'd been handling them creatively, cutting himself extra checks for the better part of a year before I caught it. When it finally came out, I did the thing you're supposed to do. I sat him down, told him I forgive you, said it in front of his wife because, if I'm honest, I wanted credit for saying it in front of somebody. And after that conversation, I felt clean for about a week. But then I noticed I kept rewriting that conversation in the shower every other morning, giving myself better lines, landing better punches. And that was 4 months after I told him I forgave him. You've probably done a version of this. You said it to the person's face, or announced it to whoever needed to hear you'd moved on. Maybe you said it in a prayer, hoping repetition would eventually make it stick. And you still feel your jaw tighten when their name comes up, still rehearse what you'd say if you ever got the chance. Saying it once was supposed to close the account. And instead, you keep getting billed. I'm not going to tell you to say it again, this time with feeling. And I'm not going to tell you the reason it didn't stick is that you don't have enough faith. Instead, I want to show you why the sentence was never the mechanism to begin with. Here's the lie. That forgiveness is a sentence you say once. And if you still flinch afterward, either you lied the first time or you're doing it wrong. Look at how Jesus actually describes it. Mark chapter 11, verse 25. And whenever you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive him, that your Father also who is in heaven may forgive you your trespasses. Notice where that happens. Praying. Alone. Nobody else is in the room. Not the person who hurt you. Not your family watching you announce it. This was never a transaction between you and them. It's between you and God, and it happens in private, which means it was never about anyone hearing you say it. There's a piece almost nobody puts next to that verse. Peter asked Jesus how many times he has to forgive somebody. Up to 7? And Jesus says, not 7. 70 times 7. That's not a math problem. Nobody's counting to 490. Jesus is telling you forgiveness was never a single completed transaction. It's something you re-enter every time the wound shows back up. The flinch when their name comes up isn't proof the first time failed. It's just the next rep. Second lie, and this one's the more expensive one, that if you've really forgiven someone, you owe them the same access they had before. Same trust. Same seat at the table. Otherwise, you're not really over it. Paul writes in Romans 12:19, "Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, 'It is mine to avenge. I will repay,' says the Lord." You're handing the debt to God. That doesn't mean you owe him a seat back at your table. Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery. Years later, he's running Egypt, and they show up starving, no idea who he is. He weeps. He forgives them. He feeds them. He also doesn't hand them the family business and pretend the pit never happened. He tests them first. Forgiven and still careful, in the same story, at the same time. Somebody in your life is going to make this argument to you eventually. Maybe already has. If you'd really forgiven him, you'd let him back at the table. Return his calls. Bring the kids around again. Like access is the receipt, and if you won't hand it over, the whole transaction gets flagged as fraud. That pressure usually comes from someone who just wants the family peaceful again. And sometimes it comes from a pulpit. But realistically, neither one gets a vote. Nobody made Joseph move his brothers into the palace the day he stopped crying. He tested them first, on his own timeline. Forgiveness was already finished. Trust was a separate negotiation, and he's the one who ran it. My friend Carol had that private part handled. She'd done the real work, the repeated release, same as we just talked about. Her problem was different. Every time her sister needed a ride, needed cash, needed somewhere to land after another blow-up, Carol showed up, because somewhere along the way she'd decided showing up was what forgiveness required of her. 2 years ago, she finally separated the two things. She kept on doing the private part, the release every time the resentment came back up. And at the same time, she stopped being the emergency contact. Her sister called it cold. Carol didn't correct her. She just didn't answer the next midnight phone call. She told me forgiving her sister got easier the day she stopped feeling like she had to prove it by picking up the phone.